Hi everyone, good afternoon and welcome to our webinar today on venture capital with impact and sustainable investments. The session will be running for 90 minutes, during which time we will discuss the topic of venture capital with impact and sustainable investments. We have a strong cohort of panelists today across venture capital funds, impact advisory service providers, development finance institutions, and tech startups. So a very well-rounded cohort of panelists. To introduce our panelists, we have on here as a virtual panelist, Ms. Thelma Ekiyo. Ms. Thelma Ekiyo has over 21 years of experience in the development sector as an impact investor, donor, philanthropic advisor, and social entrepreneur. She currently serves as the managing partner of SME-NG, Nigeria's impact investment platform, which has set up 2 impact funds focused on female entrepreneurship. We also have with us Ms. Etimore Glover. Ms. Etimore Glover, as sat beside me, is the project lead for Nigeria's Impact Investors Foundation, a non-profit organization founded in partnership with the Ford Foundation, Africa Capital Alliance, Business Day Media Limited, Bank of Industry, and Dalberg Advisors. She was previously the Pioneer Executive Secretary of the Knowledge Exchange Center, a non-profit organization focused on bridging the skills gap for young unemployed graduates. We have with us also as a virtual panelist, Mr. Atul Kurinsika. Mr. Atul is an investment professional with IFC's Disruptive Technologies and Venture Capital team for Africa, based here in Lagos, Nigeria. He has substantial experience in financial services, private equity, and venture capital investing in emerging markets, including supporting portfolio companies in value creation. We have also as a virtual panelist, Ms. Jo McDonald. Ms. Jo McDonald is an impact lead at Innovest Advisory, an impact investment firm based in South Africa and the Channel Islands. She works with funds, private wealth enterprises to embed impacts into their strategy and operations, working across investment life cycles, from development and impact strategy, deal screening and due diligence, to impact measurements and management analysis and impact reporting after deployment into companies. Last but not the least, we have Ms. Abimbola Shopeju. She's a well-versed business executive with nearly 20 years of experience working in the power, telecommunication, and finance sectors. She currently serves as the managing director and CEO of Fundor, a leading payment solution and fintech provider here in Nigeria. Before this, she served as the deputy managing director of Lumos Nigeria. Thank you all for being with us today. So the structure of this webinar is quite straightforward. We will be talking on certain speaking points. We'll be touching on certain talking points across the topic of venture capital with impact and sustainable investments. And you would each speak to various talking points on this topic. I just have a brief period of time to touch on certain talking points based on the questions I would ask you. And these questions have been compiled based on frequently asked questions on the topic of impact and sustainable investments, frequently asked questions and topics that have been collated across various platforms. So my first question goes to you, Ms. Jo. It's basically the question of what is impact investment and why is it so important in today's world? Ms. Jo, over to you.
Great, thanks, Tony, and thank you for welcoming me to the panel today. So to respond to your question, to really introduce the topic of impact investing, many of you may be familiar with the official definition by the Global Impact Investing Network, GIN, which is that impact investments are investments made with the intention to generate positive, measurable social and environmental impact alongside a financial return. Now, if we really look into that, the 2 most important elements of this are intentional and measurable. And what that really means is that investments must be intentionally impactful, that they are deliberately structured to deliver both financial and social or environmental returns. And this is most commonly provided through a fund or an enterprise having a clear impact strategy in place. An impact strategy should really outline the environmental or social problem that they are solving for, their specific impact goals, and how they will achieve them. It's very common to also align the impact strategy to achieving targeted SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. The second part of the definition is that impact is measurable and measured through tracking impact metrics and KPIs. And I will talk a little bit about impact measurement and management in more detail later. And also from the work that I do with impact funds and enterprises, I also see two more common features of impact investments. Firstly, for funds to operationalize their impact strategy and provide credible investment decision-making, they integrate impact criteria into their screening and due diligence processes. And for both funds and enterprises, impact reporting is the final element. This ranges from reporting of impact metrics to only their investors to public impact reporting each year, together with a full outline of a fund or an enterprise's impact processes, impact results, and even with case studies. And then with this definition in mind, what does impact investing really look like? Well, there's many different approaches, as I'm sure you've seen. Impact investing covers all geographies, emerging markets and developed markets. It can cover a very wide range of sectors. You will probably, many of you will work within the social impact sphere, which can include healthcare, education, agriculture, energy, water, housing, financial inclusion. I could go on, job creation, gender inclusion is very wide ranging. And then in the environmental sphere, we see the most activity around climate change, mainly climate change mitigation, some climate change adaptation and resilience, energy efficiency, waste management, circular economy, and then biodiversity and conservation. And the returns profile of impact investments can also vary significantly. Market rate returns are very possible, even market beating returns. There doesn't need to be a trade-off between impact and returns, which is really a common misperception that I hear regularly. In fact, there's increasing research from credible players such as Morgan Stanley and many others that show that sustainability funds and gender lens investing outperform traditional peer funds year on year. This is especially true during global downturns or when you're looking at financial performance with a longer term outlook. That being said, we do see concessional returns in more difficult geographies, for example, conflict states or fragile economies, or in sectors where there are more challenging business models. And impact investments comprise a range of asset classes. We're here today to talk about venture capital. The asset class that I work most commonly with, and that is most common in Southern Africa, and the region I am, is most definitely private equity, followed closely by private debt. And we're seeing some really interesting fixed income impact bonds come to the market, along with some blended finance options. So I'm often asked, why is impact investing so important, especially in today's financial climate? And really, when I step back and think about this, impact investing challenges the traditional investment opinion that social and environmental issues can only be addressed by philanthropic donations or international aid, whilst market investments should focus exclusively on financial returns. And it really serves a very important purpose to change the way that we look at investing, to bring us back to the very core of what capital provision should be about, which we believe is to serve the real needs in the society, the real economy. And if you look at the increase in impact investing over the last 5 years, we've seen significant volumes directed from traditional investing into impact investing. The GIN estimates that there's over 700 billion impact AUM in 2020. And we're seeing a growth of 45% each year, which is incredible. In West Africa, this is no different. There's very many impact enterprises doing great work in the region in financial inclusion, agriculture, and a range of sectors. And there's a significant increase in funds specifically targeting West African impact opportunities. Some that I'm more familiar with and we work with are, for example, the West African Bright Futures Fund that was recently launched this year by Cordade Investment Management. The Agribusiness Capital Fund by Injaro and Bamboo Capital is another, and the Goodwell West Africa Fund is another, but there's very many examples of funds particularly focusing on impact investments in West Africa. Despite the fantastic 45% growth a year in AUM, there remains a really significant financing gap of around $2 to $4 trillion a year to achieve the SDGs and meet the world's pressing social and environmental challenges. So for me, VC funds, that many of you are joining from today, DFIs and specialist impact funds are really stepping up to demonstrate the financial viability of investing in impactful companies. And this is de-risking large institutional investors to mobilize significantly greater amounts of capital into impactful enterprises, whilst also ensuring financial returns. And it's really only through mobilizing institutional capital and VC funds leading the way into that we will meet the SDG financing gap.
Thank you so much, Joe. That has been so helpful. I particularly was interested in, when you said that investing in impact, funds and investing in impact and return, there doesn't have to be a trade-off between focusing on those two to investors. And in fact, you've seen that, according to data, we've seen that more recently, impact-focused portfolios are outperforming traditional portfolios. That just talks to, the focus that is being placed in investing in impact-focused funds. And that's just particularly interesting to me. I think my next question is, there's a level of subjectivity that comes in when we talk about impact. What exactly is this impact and how can we measure it as a return to investors? So can you just maybe touch on that a little bit and answer that question, like how can we measure impact as a return to investors? And has there sort of been any standardized measures that have been put in place, or any standardized approaches that have been put in place sort of to act as a framework to kind of guide how we then measure this impact as a return to investors?
Yeah, absolutely. So the practice of impact measurement and management, what we call IMM, is a central component of impact investing and really differentiates an impact investment from a traditional investment. It's extremely important, and we seek to evidence the impact created for a number of reasons. First of all, we want to know that what we're doing works, to demonstrate the achievement of impact goals by either an enterprise or a fund. Investors are increasingly demanding strong impact measurement as part of driving accountability and transparency in the sector. Impact measurement can also be used as a management tool to improve impact performance or adjust strategies if there are unexpected results. And then finally, communicating your impact to stakeholders, investors, and customers can provide a really powerful engagement tool. So when we're looking to undertake IMM, impact measurement and management, it really occurs at two levels. First of all, investors require impact measurement from fund managers, who will in turn require it from the companies they invest in. Therefore, it's important that both parties, both entities, have really strong impact data collection in place. So in terms of how we actually go about doing this, I'll take you through the practical steps that we undertake with the impact funds that we work with. First of all, we begin by developing an impact measurement framework. And this is a set of impact KPIs and metrics that are designed for the particular fund or impact enterprise to evidence their specific nuanced impact. And ideally, we would construct these metrics and KPIs to align to a fund or enterprise's theory of change, if they have one. And we really look to allocate or to develop KPIs to evidence the change that can be realistically demonstrated in the short term, which we call outputs, in the medium term as outcomes, and in the longer term as ultimate impact. And if you are designing impact metrics at the fund level, you would typically develop core metrics and sector metrics. Now, core metrics are a set of standard metrics that would apply to all the companies in your fund portfolio. So these would be ones that speak to job creation, for example, to gender and diversity, or to carbon emissions. They apply to all companies, no matter what the sector. You would then develop sector metrics, which are specific to the particular portfolio companies. And you might have to have a bank of these if you're developing a pipeline and you haven't selected your final portfolio companies yet. And these may be things such as megawatts renewable energy installed if you're investing in an energy company, or it could be liters of water treated if it's a water company, or number of patients, or number of students, etc., depending on the sector. And it's really important that the metrics are specific and clearly defined, that they are clear on the units that are being used, and that the frequency of collection is clear, the methodology, how you're going to collect that data is clear, and from who. And with this in mind, investors are increasingly seeking to use standardized metric sets to increase consistency and, importantly, reduce the burden of data collection put on funds and companies. And we really hear this a lot from funds and companies. For example, if they have 4 investors, each requires slightly different impact data, it puts a significant admin burden on the fund or on the company to tailor the data collection and reporting to each individual investor. And DFIs are the most active investors promoting these standardized metrics. And the most widespread and commonly used metric set is IRIS+. Many of you may be familiar with this or have heard of this. IRIS+ was first developed by the GIN in 2008, but it's continually updated. I think the last update was last year. And it's a large Excel database that is publicly available, containing nearly 700 metrics that cover all investment sectors. It also maps the alignment of the IRIS+ metrics onto other standards and frameworks, such as the SDGs. So building on this large set of 700 standards global metrics, in 2013, a group of prominent DFIs released what we call the Harmonized Indicators for Private Sector Operations, HIPSO. They released the HIPSO indicators, and they committed to request HIPSO indicator reporting from their investments to really try and unburden the portfolio companies from data collection. And HIPSO is a set of 38 core indicators across 12 sectors. They are all a subset of IRIS+. And then going one step further, in 2021, the group of DFIs published a smaller subset of these metrics called the Joint Impact Indicators, the JII. These are 18 indicators, also IRIS+ indicators, and these speak more to the core indicators that I mentioned that would apply to any enterprise, no matter what sector. So these focus on jobs, on gender, and on climate. And then once you have developed your list of KPIs and metrics, the next stage is to implement data collection. So here, first you develop the data collection tools to be used by the company. And these can be Excel sheets, they can be online forms, or they can even be mobile phone-based surveys for beneficiary surveys. The data collection tools should be administered and completed by the company, and really once a year is sufficient. As impact creation is a longer term process, and we don't see change that quickly. So we find once a year is perfectly acceptable, and investors typically ask for once a year reporting. Once you've gathered the impact data in your annual period, this enables you to undertake impact analysis. And here you're really looking at what was your impact performance of that year as an enterprise or as a fund. And what is the change over time? How has the last 3 years, how has the performance changed over the last 3 years? And you're really seeking to draw out the impact story here. once you have understood what the data is telling you, you can then dashboard your results for internal use, which is a really powerful way to visualize the impact story. And then you can report, or you then turn dashboards into interactive reports for your investors or even for public reporting. So just briefly, in addition to these standard metric sets, there's a growing number of other international reporting frameworks and standards, such as the IFC's Impact Principles, the SDG Impact Standards. In fact, there's over 20 commonly used reporting frameworks, and they are developing. We see another one every 3 to 6 months. But these apply mainly to funds rather to impact enterprises. Therefore, I will stop here for now, but I'll be happy to discuss other standards in the Q&A after the presentations.
Thank you so much, Joe. That was so helpful. I think you've given quite substantive information on the different, frameworks like the GII, HIPSO, IRIS Plus, and many more. And of course, we'll be happy to take any questions from the audience at the end of the session. If you have a question regarding, these measurement frameworks. Thank you.
Thanks.
Just moving on to our next topic, and which is for you, Ms. Etemore. Ms. Etemore is as I mentioned, the project lead for Nigeria's Impact Investors Foundation. What would you say are the avenues for impact investment? Whether that's looking at a global perspective or domestic perspective here. What avenues are there for impact investments?
Thank you very much, Tony, and good afternoon, everyone joining us from this region. Joe had really spoken a lot to some things I was going to speak on. If you look at one of the core features of impact investing is that it cuts across asset types and asset classes, whether they are cash equivalents, whether they are fixed income investments, private equity, venture capital, impact bonds, impact funds. It depends on the investment strategy of the investors, the kind of significant outcomes they want to get. I'll mention that impact investing is quite nascent in a market like Nigeria, where you see investors are comfortable in ring-fencing it as an asset class, but actually it's an investment strategy that you can use in any shape or form. Just depends on what you want to achieve. I mentioned looking at our own geography where we have significant challenges, social development challenges. It's now important to see how we can get more private sector involvement into impact investing. The traditional way, like Joe mentioned earlier on, we have been funding social development has been through ODAs, has been through philanthropic sources, government funds, which is now dwindling. So how do we get more private investors into this space? And there are no trade-offs, like mentioned earlier on. So when there are no trade-offs, we have investors make returns. So it's not just your traditional instruments you use. You can use it across any kind of asset classes. Looking at also what Joe mentioned earlier on, you can use it in any sector: healthcare, education, agriculture. We have certain key areas that we have social development in Nigeria, whether access to basic services. You can use those kind of funds for all of that. Mentioning some areas and geographies that impact investing has been providing real solution. I'll use Nigeria as a case study. In recent times, you're seeing innovative financial instruments that have been designed to address some specific issues in the climate space. Recently, we saw the green bonds, the federal government sovereign green bonds that were released in 2017. We had about $10.69 billion that was raised. That was the first raise. Second raise in 2019, we had about $15 billion that was raised. With technical assistance from few development institutions, they were able to come up with a development market product that have seen more green bond issuers issuing more green bonds to address solutions. For instance, the Access Bank raised a 15 billion green bond that was used to address flooding in Victoria Island. So these are some reasonable outcomes that we are getting with impact investing in innovative financial instruments. Also, the 15 billion was also used to address the energy challenges in metropolitan parts of Lagos. We also seen some significant impact funds in agriculture. Agriculture is one huge area where we are seeing more capital being deployed by investors. in our climate and even across West African region. There's a FAFIN fund, a fund for agricultural finance in Nigeria, which is being managed by Sahel Capital. That's about a $65.9 million fund. And that really has been able to address some food shortages that we have seen in the food supply chain in Nigeria. So many impact funds being designed to address specific challenges that we are seeing. Recently, the federal government, in partnership with a few development finance institutions, are coming up with a social impact bond. And the social impact bond is being designed to provide financing for the Nigerian government's new development plan, 2021-2025 development plan, where the government intends to raise significant people out of poverty. I mean, if you look at the unemployment rate in Nigeria, it's about 33%, which is double digit, it's quite high. So we need significant financing from private sector to unlock job opportunities for those young people, particularly who are unemployed, to get meaningful employment. So funds like that will address that. And access to finance for micro, small, and medium enterprises is a huge problem too that we have. So if you look at all of these instruments, that we've just mentioned, some of them are not suitable for micro, small, and medium enterprises. We need to have the intentionality to provide the kind of financing that MSMEs can have access, and particularly social enterprises that are designed to provide solutions, in some of these key areas. So the National Advisory Board for Impact Investing, which is where I lead as well, in partnership with the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning, we're working together to set up a wholesale fund. And the wholesale fund is two things. Is a market builder. I mentioned earlier on that our market is nascent. We need to work towards building the market infrastructure where you have policies that recognize impact investors and investment strategy, unlocking more private capital from private investors into the space, incentivizing them, and also demanding for right capital. And that is the market advocacy aspect of the fund. There's also the fund of fund, which should give MSMEs and enterprises access to capital to enable that one, they provide meaningful solutions, provide job creations for young people, the populace, and also to address some of those challenges that we see, like access to basic services, healthcare, which is not available, access to quality education, even opportunities for women to have access to, financing for themselves. So this is what the people are doing to address significant challenges in the impact investing space in Nigeria.
Wow, that has been so informative and so helpful. I particularly liked what you said about, impact investments not being an investment class, not being, constrained to an investment class, but it's actually an investment strategy that can be applied across various asset classes, and how we can help, aside from providing social benefits, also, provide improvements to the employment sector, the employment rates here in Nigeria that otherwise the public sector alone cannot, fulfill, cannot bridge. So I guess my next question to you would just be, what would you say are the geographies that are being focused on now by impact investors, and sort of what is driving, what is being considered by these impact investors when we're looking at these geographies?
In the most recent study carried out by the Global Impact Investing Network, where they surveyed around 300 global impact investors, we see capital, and by the way, these investors are managing about 404 billion impact investment. So about 55% of the asset under management are being deployed in in developed markets, and 40% into emerging markets. So like Joe said earlier on, impact investing takes place anywhere, but we are seeing that more investors are looking into emerging markets. The two main geographies where you can see impact investing being deployed, you see about 30% of assets under management going to US and Canada, where you have most of their headquarters, these impact funds and the DFIs and most of the impact investors. You also see about 11% coming to assets under management coming to sub-Saharan Africa. But in terms of volume, Sub-Saharan Africa is a destination where many of these investors are coming into Then there's MENA, Middle East and North Africa, about 9% of the asset under management going to that area. Then there's West, North, and Southern Europe, about 15% of the asset under management are being deployed in those areas. I think what investors are looking out for, particularly those who are investing for impact, they're looking out for a region where you can have the highest impact. You know, looking at continent like Africa, Nigeria, where you have a large demand for basic services. You know, so there's that demand that drives investors to also come into the space. There's also other factors, you know, which goes outside demand, ease of doing business. You know, if your terrain is not really easy to do business, you know, it can be quite disturbing. Looking at the trend of impact investment in West Africa, there is an opportunity for impact capital to grow in West Africa. 2018, for instance, impact capital was about $1.4 billion for the West African region, vis-a-vis the Middle East and North Africa, which is about $2.8 billion. So there's a huge gap. Then comparing it to East Africa, which is just our neighbor, from a period of between 2005 to 2015, 40 impact investors were deployed about $6.8 billion in West Africa. But in East Africa, we had 155 impact investors deployed about $9.3 billion in East Africa. So we need to start asking ourselves the right questions around policies. Do we have consistent policies? So do we have the right environment and the attractiveness for investors to come in? However, I don't think we should beat ourselves too badly, because you're not doing too badly, because Nigeria is one of the largest markets in West Africa and even the largest in Africa. So that in itself is quite attractive to investors. You know, the riskier the terrain, the more reward investors will get. So there's that, you know, attraction to come into Nigeria. However, for us to see some significant growth in impact capital in countries like Nigeria and other West African countries, we need to start, you know, working with the governments to ensure that we have the right policies, we have the right environment, you know, some restrictions, you know, that would be not attractive to investors, because an investor wants to come in and be able to take out his finance when it's time to, you know, take the finance out, and then again, exits. It's so important. Before I come into a place, I need to know that there's a strong demonstration of exits. So our market hasn't been able to, we've not been able to have strong exits to help us strengthen the case of impact investing in the market. So us at the National Advisory Board for Impact Investing, while building the impact investing ecosystem, are very deliberate in working with the government to ensure that, look, some of these barriers needs to be broken. We need to have more private capital participation in impact investing. Currently, if you look at the study we did in 2015, it shows about 15% private capital participation. Compare that to South Africa, which is almost like 50% participation. So how do we change the narrative to get private, local private participation in impact investors? What we would like to see in this space.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tamara. That's so helpful, and that actually brings me to my next speaking point, to Ms. Thelma Ekio. Ms. Thelma, as mentioned, is the managing partner at SME NG in Nigeria's impact investment platform that currently runs 2 impact funds that are focused on female entrepreneurs. Ms. Thelma, just leading on, you know, following on from Ms. Etimore's point about, you know, sort of these challenges towards impact investments here that we're seeing, you know, in West Africa compared to East Africa, which might also basically impact, you know, the decision of impact investors about which geographies to come in. What would you say, you know, in your work as an impact investor and philanthropist, are sort of the challenges that you're seeing, I guess in Africa, and maybe even more domestically here in Nigeria, towards impact investing? What are the constraints and challenges, and are there any mitigants to help alleviate this?
Thank you very much, Tony, and it's good to be here joining you. I think first and foremost, before I talk about the challenges, I must acknowledge the growth of impact investing, so that we don't sound like we're always throwing cold water on progress. 10 years ago, when probably 11 now, when the first impact investment forum was organized, we were not up to 20 in the room that could actually convincingly speak on the subject. And so the fact that in 2022, everywhere I turn, somebody's hosting something on impact investing in itself is tremendous growth. It shows that there's interest. It shows that there's a knowledge base that's increasing, and also that the actors are certainly more than the 20 of us that were having this conversation 11 years ago. Having said that, there's still a number of challenges that I guess creates room for more work to be done. And the first challenge I'd like to talk about is the conceptual framing of impact investing itself. I still sit on panels, not this one, where people say things like, well, if you create jobs in Nigeria, it's impact investing. Anybody who does anything in Africa that helps, to address poverty is impact investing. And so that conceptual framing is extremely important. It's the reason why academia has to be part of this conversation, because there has to be a constant effort to shape people's understanding. Because if there's conceptual confusion, then how do people engage in this dialogue? And how do people implement what they fully do not understand? No one has mentioned to date, but I'm sure everyone knows that the central point of impact investing is the intentionality of the strategy. And so the entire impact investing industry is based on this concept of intentionality. And the fact that where this concept is watered down or doesn't exist, then we're not talking about impact investing. Whereas we can be talking about very good investing. It can be social investing. There's the argument whether ESG is automatically impact investing. And these are necessary, I won't call them debates, but certainly necessary conversations to have as you frame a sector and you encourage people to come into the sector. And even more so now as more and more I'm involved in a process of more and more educational institutions, higher educational institutions in Africa teaching impact investing. So that for me is one of the things that I think we should still never lose in this conversation. Otherwise, you will come back to a process that, it will be so watered down that we will once again not be able to talk about things like measurement, which is my next challenge. Accurate measurement. I think more than just saying measurement, accurately measuring the impact is a problem. Anybody who's done any type of development work or even impact investing, we know two things. Measurement takes time and measurement has to be standardized. Investors do not have the patience for measurement across board. So you find that the investors that come from the development world or investors that are like foundations are more amiable towards this whole concept of measurement taking time. But as we encourage new types of investors to take on impact investing and not so new types of investors such as private equity, this question of impact taking time is not one investors want to hear. Investors want return on their capital yesterday. And we're not able to, the impact investment community has to deal with this problem of measurement. We've talked about standardization. Joe mentioned it. Who is creating the standards? They are global standards for impact investing, but are they relevant to me in Africa? And this constant challenge of people treating Africa like a country and not a continent also introduces another level of challenges. Because something works in Kenya does not mean it will work in Nigeria. And so those of us who are in the investment space, we constantly have to deal with these issues. I think the capacity of the actors within the impact investment sector by and large is relatively weak. And what I mean by that is you need, for example, Etemori mentioned the involvement of the government. You need the very big players that can serve as champions to be within this impact investment ecosystem, as well as the small players and the relatively small players. If you're talking about ecosystem building, it has to be different types of actors. But by and large, the people who want to be engaged in impact investing and who are devoting time and energy to it are not necessarily the biggest players in the markets. And so this agenda of particularly, I know the Nigerian impact investments scene, even though I know the African one, but the Nigerian one, let me speak about that more. The effort to deliberately include the private sector, both on the National Advisory Board, which I serve on, and even look at the involvement of financial institutions and other private sector actors is crucial to the survival of the ecosystem. Talking about the ecosystem, I think the question around who invests in the building of the ecosystem is a problem. Everyone talks about ecosystem building for impact investing in theory as a very good one, but in practice, it's really expensive. So who invests in building this ecosystem? Where impact investing has worked, you find that there's significant investment that goes into building the ecosystem, significant investment that goes into building the capacity of intermediary organizations, significant investment that deliberately is channeled to make sure that impact investing, the hypothesis of it is proven. That investment doesn't exist at the moment. I think I'll just talk about, if you get me on challenges, I told you I can go on a bit, but I'll talk a little bit about the last two. The fact that there's still the question about impact investing being this dichotomy between, is it impact first or finance first or returns first? And this being a question that most investors, especially financial institutions, private equity investors will tell you, no, we want returns first, and don't even give us the choice. Why do we have to? So in the impact investment world, the question is, are we talking about impact first or returns first? The foundations, the folks in the foundations world will tell you, you know what, we're willing to go with impact first. But the private equity actors will tell you, no, I want my returns first. How do you harmonize this dichotomy and destroy the misconception that impact investment immediately means below market rate returns? I think when you have that misconception, it drives away the commercial actors. Lastly, I think it's important as we talk about impact investing in Africa as a continent first, and in Nigeria particularly, to encourage indigenous capital. It adds to the credibility of the sector. The problem, when you talk about the figures in Africa, I was listening to the figures. The global figures are 715 billion as of 2021. And in West Africa, we're talking 4 billion. First of all, that's even not something that is even comparable, right? But then if you put a finer comb on those figures, you'll find a majority of the impact investing is done by foreign inward investing. That has to change. That has to change. And so we need to have a lot more indigenous investing going on and encouraging a lot more Africa to Africa investing or Nigeria to investing to prove that this is a viable sector. And then obviously success stories, the documentation of success stories. The stories are few and far between. We need a lot more success stories that impact investment is viable for people to put more capital. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Thelma. That has been so informative. I particularly like just what you said now, that we need a lot more success stories. I think that's one angle that we haven't really looked that. I know Joe touched on that a little bit when she said about, impact-focused portfolios outperforming, some traditional portfolios. But I think if hearing more impact stories and more impactful stories here in Nigeria and Africa would encourage more local players. I also like what you talked about, the intentionality that has to be behind impact investing. So we don't get the concept, a little bit mixed up with, oh, well, as long as I'm improving jobs and increasing jobs, as long as I'm providing, I guess, some sort of social benefit, it's immediately impact investing. I think that is so helpful behind just understanding what impact investing is, and also how you mentioned the progress that has been made today. So we don't just focus on these challenges and these constraints that can be alleviated. I guess that just brings me to my next talking point for you. As the managing partner of SMENG, running two successful female entrepreneurship focused funds, what would you say is the nexus between gender lens investing and impact investing?
Thank you. So in terms of just making sure we're on the same page, when we say gender lens investing, what we're talking about is the intentional inclusion of a gender strategy across all investment processes. That's what we're talking about, to attain gender equality and also to produce better investment outcomes. And so gender lens investing is a framework for impact investing, because in fact, impact investing talks about attaining social, environmental, and financial returns. You can apply a gender lens across all of them. Gender lens investing over the last few years has become more popular. We were doing gender lens investing before it was called gender lens investing. It's been called women's empowerment. It's been called gender equity. Now we're very happy with the investment of 2X and the $15 billion commitment by the G7 towards gender lens investing. It's increased the visibility of the importance of investing in women and provided a global framework for all of us to understand what we're talking about. But on the ground, gender lens investing essentially means not the inclusion of women. Let me start with that, because there is a misconception that gender lens investing is once you include women, or if you hire a woman to head your organization, you have a gender lens. No, it's very possible for a woman to not want to apply a gender lens in her investing. So let me first, debunk that myth. Gender lens investing is more than a female face. It requires applying a gender lens where you look at the representation of men vis-a-vis women in all the processes. And the reason why it seems to be that there's a focus on women is because men are traditionally the status quo of institutions, and the investment and financial space in Africa and globally is male dominated. There's still not up to 3% of funds across the VC space that are headed by women. In Nigeria, there are only 5 self-confessed gender lens funds in a country of 200 million people. I think this paints a picture of the gap that exists. The African Development Bank, in a study that was done with the IFC, says that there's a $42 billion gap adversely against female entrepreneurs in Africa. So the question you ask is, if there is an accepted norm that it is important to invest in women, why is there limited capital flowing to women? And that across Africa, it's not just in Nigeria, but in Nigeria, one of the things that we had to do as a gender lens fund is ensure that we are committed to disproving the misconception that there are not enough businesses to invest in, which is one of the problems with investing in women, by investing in our own All Women's Accelerator. And to date has 650 female entrepreneurs. Also ensuring that capital goes to women across the investment spectrum. There's a tendency to only invest in women that are at the stage of scaling, and ignoring women that are on the middle, what everyone calls the missing middle. So how do we break this glass ceiling that exists in investing, but also investing in value chains that include women, and products and services that deliberately target women and girls. This is how we are contributing to the conversation, notably where you didn't have that before. A lot more investors are deliberately including a gender lens into their strategy because of empirical data that shows that when you include more women on boards, there's a 28% increase in terms of the performance of those investment portfolios. And also the report by McKinsey that says deliberately including a gender lens will result in 12 trillion in global annual GDP by 2025. So, the argument is sound, the data is here, we just need to merge practice with the theory. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Thelma. That was very, very, very helpful. Again, just speaking to the amount of benefit that could come into the economy once we put this into practice. The data is there, like you mentioned. The gap that can be closed, the benefits that can be created. I think you mentioned something, $12 trillion that can come into the economy. Again, once we put these practices, into play. Again, the work just needs to be done, and funds like yours that are focused on that. And, as we have more sessions like this and more conversations like this, hopefully we can kind of help, bridge that gap a little bit more. Thank you. So that brings me to my next talking point. Ms. Abimbola Shobeju. Ms. Abimbola Shobeju, as mentioned previously, is the current Managing Director and CEO of Fundal, a payment solution provider here in Nigeria. And that just brings me to my question on what role do you feel like entrepreneurs and even startups, can play today? So the conversation is not just around, impact funds, DFIs, venture capital players. Again, the conversation also, could exist around startups and entrepreneurs here in Africa. So as the CEO of, what you would consider a problem-solving SME, how can, investors and everyday consumers, identify an industry or a sector that can provide large social, or a business that can provide large social or environmental impact? Are there any key standards that we should be looking out for when we're looking at SMEs that could provide potential impact and can be targets to impact-focused investors? And again, you in running an SME here, an impact-focused SME, what would you say are the major challenges to maintaining that impact focus as an SME here in Nigeria, as opposed to just taking a financial performance approach, looking at targeting financial returns, as opposed to focusing on that? What would you say are the major challenges in maintaining an impact focus? And finally,
go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Actually, I'll just ask the final question at the end.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tony. When we speak around the roles that entrepreneurs can play, in terms of investments and impact investments, we need to consider that the paradigm is actually shifting, and today consumers and of course investors are not only interested in the quality of products and services, but they want to know that companies that they're working with, they're related to, they're partnering with, also are showing up for their local and their global communities, and they're doing this in meaningful ways. A common trend is when people talk about social and environmental impacts, they will speak around, things like climate change, global warming, greener earth, and areas of that nature. But, we still also have to think about, the immediate environment in which people work and they operate in, so you have to think about things like hunger, poverty alleviation, homelessness, financial literacy for areas like, Nigeria and Africa, as the case may be. So where do SMEs come in and where do entrepreneurs come in, in this, SMEs world over, they have an impact on the social and economic development of the communities in which and the areas in which they operate. And economies of both developed and developing nations, they've embraced SMEs, right, as a source of employment, as a source of income generation, as a source of poverty alleviation, for innovation, and also in terms of, industrial growth, as the case may be. And I know that you're familiar with the survey that was done by PwC, I believe, that shows that SME contributes quite, a significant portion of our GDP. And, they also contribute
Apologies, that we seem to have
services as we have it. So SMEs provide services a lot.
Apologies, Mr. Bimbola, we seem to be.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. So SMEs, and they have quite that they can contribute in terms of their areas, their immediate areas. So when you want to think about speaking to the potential SMEs have and the impact that they have, it's important in terms of measuring the full impact of the economic, the social, and also the environmental impact of the activities on the society and their immediate areas. And this would vary from industry to industry. As an example, a consumer packaged business, for instance, we'll be looking at how do you want to conserve water? How do you want to make sure that, the limited natural resources that you have in your area, how best are you, able to, apply that, and ensuring that, you're providing responsible, environmental footprints. For a company that is around the biopharmaceutical area, they'll be conducting ethical human trials, or how best to prevent mistreatment of animals, for instance, when you're doing your clinical trials. So as an entrepreneur that is looking to incorporate social impact into your organization's mission, you might want to consider some of the salient points that speak to what value is the industry going to deliver, and what societal and environmental problems will it help you to solve? What benefits will people gain from it? How many people will benefit from it? Because that speaks to in terms of sustainability. How do they actually benefit from it? And is this ingrained into your strategy and your business model? As you want to go ahead. In terms of also looking at what value you want to provide in terms of from the impact side. A popular belief that people hold is that when you're focused on impacts, it then affects your revenue and your ability to be able to generate income, because people then begin to think about, I think it was Ms. Telma that spoke to that earlier, that because you are focused on impact might then mean that financially, you have to, it's either of the other, it's either impact or finances, but it doesn't have to really be that way, because for you to look at that, you then have to look at what models, do you want to adopt, and then when you do that in terms of the environment that the SME is covering, you can see the returns in terms of, the trust that the businesses will build within the communities that they're, working with, how do you engage with people in that locality when you're speaking to your customers that you're working with, in terms of customer loyalty, how are you working with that, generally, how do you do the business of telling a story, and not just telling the story of your business, but telling the story from the perspective of the communities in which you're working from. So I believe SMEs and startups, they have a lot to play in that regard.
Thank you so much, Ms. Abimbola. You've been very, very informative, particularly on the role that SMEs can play and how SMEs are contributing, how the conversation is now shifting towards, again, the role of SMEs in impact investing, and the intentionality of SMEs to focus on impact. And again, as we've all mentioned, not necessarily think of it as a trade-off between financial performance and impact. Thank you. That's been very, very helpful. I guess before I move on to the other questions, please, I'd like to speak to the audience. We put that in the chat already, but please feel free to ask questions and put those in the chat. And we would aim to address, most of the questions towards the end, at the end of the session. Thank you. So, Ms. Abimbola, just one more question for you. As the CEO of an SME, do you believe that there is financial gain to be made from entrepreneurs seeking to establish impact-focused SMEs as opposed to traditional, the traditional focus or traditional SMEs?
Okay. Yes, there is financial gains to make from that, but the major priority would not be just to think about the financial gains. You first of all think about, like you mentioned, what impacts are you looking to make, especially which area you're looking to make that impact. So you have to think about going through what the essence is of what you want to do. So most entrepreneurs and SMEs that are looking, interested in impact, they're desirous of sustainable change, and they're passionate about this. They're passionate about the cause, and the primary motive is not really about the financial gain. But as you're aware, money is important, right? Both for the entrepreneur and also for the investors that are coming in. So you have to think about that beyond that. But you can have a sweet spot in between both of them, right? Where you have the entrepreneur looking to create impact, looking to make sure that they're growing the business, and then when you're also looking at how you then deliver value. But there should be gains that come from that, and I would like to speak to, some of the areas in which, for instance, we as Pondor, we hold there, some of the things that we look at is how do you then provide, platforms that enable people to be able to find a way of incentivizing also all the social, all the social plans that people are trying to look at, so how do you do this? How do you make sure that, not just, talking only about the finances, but how do you create, a wider reach and impact around that? So part of our mission as Fondor is, to transform, banking by incentivizing people into doing social good. And in doing this, you can speak to things that can help the immediate communities in which our various businesses that we support, that they work from. So for instance, some of the areas that are important to us are like SDG 1 that speaks to no poverty, SDG 4 that speaks to quality education, SDG 8 that speaks to decent work and economic growth, and also in doing all of this and speaking to financial inclusion and removing the financial inequalities, then you can actually make sure that all the businesses that you're working with, you're putting, social criteria that helps them to give back to the communities and the areas that they work in. You're putting it, as an area that is important for them to achieve their goals. And in doing this also, they are able to meet not just the needs of the businesses that we're supporting and working with, but also you're making sure that you're getting some financial returns from that.
Thank you so much, Ms. Abimbola. That has been very, very helpful. And speaking to what you said, and what a lot of speakers have said, yes, we are seeing that there is financial gains to be made from taking an impact focus. However, as Ms. Thelma has said, with impact investing, you must also consider the intentionality behind, impacting, behind the impact, the role of impact that you are having, with such a target, such a business. And I guess that brings me to my next speaker, last but definitely not the least, Mr. Atul Kurinsikal, the only man on our panel today. Thank you so much for joining us. Mr. Atul currently works for the EAVC in the Disruptive Venture Capital Division. And so we would just like you to speak towards, what role can institutional investors play in impact investing? We've heard about different figures on the inflow of and growth of impact investments here in Africa, particularly from DFIs, today. And if you could just speak to that inflow of funds, what exactly would you say are the trends and what are the factors that have led to this inflow of funds particularly across Africa and Nigeria? And what are these DFIs thinking about, before deciding on, a geographic destination to invest in when it comes to impact? Thank you.
No, thank you, Tony, and the Emerging Africa team for inviting me. And it's a pleasure to speak a few words about the role of development finance institutions as the leading institutional investors on the continent in supporting especially the private equity and venture capital ecosystem. So, in fact, DFIs have been active in Africa for decades, focusing on the overall development of the private sector by providing financing to larger companies directly, but also MSMEs and consumers indirectly through the financial services industry. So the DFIs can also provide other support like technical assistance and advisory and so on. Given the domestic private sector in many of the markets on the continent where it's a growing stage, these institutions represented the bulk of the capital that was available for a growing company. I think a good example would be the telecom infrastructure in Nigeria and beyond in Africa, with the likes of MTS and Safaricom and Telcel, which is now Airtel, Helios Tower and IHS Towers and so on. They all received support from DFIs at different stages of their growth story. And of course, as we've talked about impact and the definition and the measurement and of that and so on, of course, these DFIs have a mandate for development. It's in their name. But of course, the focus is also on generating financial returns and sustainable institutions and ecosystems. So So I was looking at some of the DFI, one of the website of a DFI, and it said, our mission is to do good without losing money. So, and this is extremely relevant when, investing in PE and VC, given the inherently higher risk nature of some of this asset class. So I work in venture capital, and I know a recent report from a research platform that DFIs have invested over 2.6 billion in more than 100 startups directly in Africa since 2015. And this is a figure that's been growing every year. If you look at, over the last 5-6 years, the total capital that went into startups on the continent is a bit north of that 10 billion. So almost 30% of the funding directly came from DFIs. And the IFC, the institution that I'm a part of, has been at the forefront of this effort. We've invested in over 25 companies with ticket sizes ranging from 5 to 25 million. This is also closely followed by other DFIs like that of the UK, the BII, the SMO, one from Netherlands, Proparco, and of course the Africa Development and others. So I think the trend is very positive, and it points towards the recognition of the role of venture capital or investments in technology startups can play in supporting the overarching development goals and also return goals of DFI. There is emerging evidence through measurement, as I think one of our panelists talked about measurement and the importance of being patient and in getting to these figures. I think now there is emerging evidence through this measurement that digital economy investments can help create employment at a large scale, reach the informal sector. I think this is particularly important, where where the formal sectors and financial services industry has lagged behind. So it's an indirect way to reach the informal sector and fill some certain key market gaps to build infrastructure and overall drive economic growth in these markets. The DFIs have also recognized more and more the ways in which they themselves can add value beyond the investment itself, so that these companies can leapfrog and some of these specific challenges faced by larger bureaucratic and private sector industries. For example, I'll take the example of fintech in Nigeria again. The inflow of foreign capital that went into this space in the last couple of years is being tremendous. This is due to a variety of reasons, but I believe that the recognition of venture capital as an asset class to generate impact and reach a large, or at least theoretically reach a large consumer base is being a clear factor. I'll take an example of from our side. We invest in a company called Trade Depot in Nigeria, which is a business-to-business e-commerce platform that supports consumer goods brands to thousands of retailers, help make the distribution value chain more efficient, also provide them with financing. We supported them at an initial stage and supported them continuously at different stages of their growth story, because they have again demonstrated the impact of reaching almost 100,000 merchants, making that supply chain more efficient, and also being able to collect data on them and provide them with financing and so on, where traditional financial services industry would not be able to do so. And if you look at the overall trends as well, fundraising rounds and the sectors and also the countries that DFI focus on, I think is also always a factor of the kind of scale of impact they can generate, and also the risk appetite that is in the mandate of these institutions. Of course, that means investing in the most developed ecosystems like Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa. Also in fundraising rounds such as CHB or CEC, where there's always some traction and evidence of performance. Also in sectors like climate and sustainability, agriculture, education, health, transport, and mobility, where you see the most of these challenges, and there's this space to generate and get that impact that we require. I think an important point that is not in this figure I mentioned about 2.6 billion is that DFIs also invest indirectly through local institutions as well, which I believe is core to what is needed when an ecosystem is growing and when you need an inducing environment for entrepreneurship. So I think this starts at the idea stage, where we have a facility, for example, which invests in commercially oriented incubators and accelerators and seed funds and similar vehicles, where we invest with a very small invest a ticket size of 1 to 2 million, which is extremely small for a large DFI. But these structures, provide seed capital and guidance to entrepreneurs and helping, building innovative local businesses, which would, be of scale in the future. And the support from DFIs with capital, but also transfer of best standards on environmental and social and also the governance aspect at this earlier stage is quite important in my view. The EFIs also provide and signal to other institutional investors and foreign investors, for example, to provide that there is a sustainable track to investing on the continent, investing in this asset class, and also, of course, moving to be also investing in more traditional venture capital funds, which provide one of those first institutional checks. So I was looking at some of the numbers. Over 60% of the capital received by the likes of TLCom, Partech, the leading VC funds that you see on the continent are provided by DFIs. So this is an approach that makes sense for them as well, because these DFIs are big entities, are not traditionally structured to take on that early stage risk and invest in hundreds of company startups at the same time. So through these small ticket investments through funds, it's a sensible approach to track these investee companies, support them with the best practice for the funds as well, be it ESG, be it governance, be it providing additional source of capital, additional mobilizing investors, and so on, and come directly at an later stage where they'll be at a growth stage and will need more capital, and the DFIs will be at a position to provide that capital directly. And what I've seen as well is DFIs we are demanding these fund managers to expand and go into difficult markets, support businesses in areas such as and care for areas such as gender and climate and so on, and go at markets outside the big six that we saw in the chart earlier, markets like Senegal or Ethiopia and so on, and transfer the best standards and learnings from other emerging markets as well. I can also give you two examples of companies in which we initially supported. They accelerated, that funded this idea. Then we supported the fund, VC fund, venture capital fund that backed them at the seed stage, giving them a $1 million fundraising. And as it reached the stage of commercial traction, IFC and other DFIs directly invested and provide a larger ticket. And as it became scaled further, we were able to bring about other commercial investors and even mobilize debt for working capital and so on to help in the growth story. So I think to conclude, I definitely strongly believe in the role DFIs are playing in supporting this E and VC ecosystem. And I think it will become more important given a scarcity of capital that we'll experience soon because of the downturn some of these markets are facing globally. And also the continent only receives about 1 to 2% of the global venture capital investment. So DFI as a source of capital and expertise is extremely important. I'll stop there and follow up with any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Atul. That has been very, very informative, and it's interesting to hear about the growing ecosystem you've mentioned. And again, I particularly find it interesting the approach that DFIs are taking in terms of investing directly into some impact-focused businesses and SMEs here in Africa, or taking the fund of funds approach and investing via venture capital or private equity funds again, and we're beginning to see that grow more and more. And again, it's like you mentioned, it's a growing trend that we're expecting to continue. And again, that's good news for us here. Again, if we can put into practice some of the mitigants that we discussed to the constraints in impact investing, we should expect that to actually grow and keep growing. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for all your participation today. I think our panelists have spoken really, really well, and everyone can testify to that. So I think we'll just use the last few minutes of the session to take a few questions that have been compiled from the audience during the session, and those have actually been sent to me, and I'll just read them out so we can handle that. I think if anyone would like to answer the questions, then you can just signal that. Otherwise, I will just assign it to anybody. Okay, so I think our first question here is curious to how impact investing is different from socially responsible investing. Can Ms. Thelma please speak to this? Ms. Thelma, are you there?
Hello, yeah, sorry. Was that question to me?
Yes, it was directed to you particularly. So the person asked, curious as to how impact investing is different from socially responsible investing. Can Ms. Thelma please speak to this?
Okay, whoever that person is, thank you very much for giving me work this afternoon. So, like I said, the main thing you need to worry about or know is intentionality. Socially responsible investing, has been also called ethical investing, and so that's when the investor is deliberately seeking to attach what people call a good ticket to their investing. And that's usually being used when people are looking at investing to do with the environment or investing to do with reducing. I know that a lot of people that have invested around carbon emissions have used, social responsible investing. But the intentionality is not there. And what the difference between that and impact investing is anyone can decide, I just want my company to reduce its carbon emissions and invest in that process. That is socially responsible investing. Whereas impact investing will require you to develop a strategy that is company-wide, that looks at how the company will get financial returns. Whereas a socially responsible investor may not be interested in the financial returns as a priority, but an impact investor, that will be a priority, as well as how the investment will have a social impact on the investee community, as well as the company as a whole. A company has a social environment, so how the investment will affect the social environment of the company. And then lastly, of course, the environmental question is addressed. So that is, wherever you're talking about impact investing, it must be based on an intentional framework that incorporates the company, the entity. So we're talking about company here, but it could be an organization that's not necessarily a private sector company, but the organization itself, internally and externally, as well as the returns. There must be financial returns. We can debate about whether those financial returns are below market rate, or above market. That's a whole other conversation, but there must be returns. What that means is a foundation that gives a grant can do socially responsible investing, but if that foundation does not get that money back, it's not impact investing. So wherever you see people sacrificing returns, that's why most people say grants are not impact investing. And so because of that criticism, a lot of grants giving organizations have started doing things like convertible grants or grants that have returns of some sort. So without going into a lecture, those are the easiest ways to differentiate.
Thank you so much, Ms. Thelma. I think that pretty much answers it, the question. As you mentioned, it has to do with the intentionality behind it as well, and the thorough framework around the entire ecosystem, I guess, of the business that should be built around impact. I guess the next question was, how can an individual investor participate in impact investing? I think this is actually a good question. So I'm assuming the person means, I guess, an everyday investor, an everyday man, so like a retail investor, for example. How can an everyday retail investor participate in impact investments? I think Mr. Thelma, you'll be well suited to answer that.
Like Thelma said, person has given work. I think it's very easy, for everyday individual to start thinking about, impact investing. How your funds, can, be used to, achieve some measurable outcomes in whatever areas. So one easy way is to reach out to the venture capital PE equity funds that are impact focused, and also contribute, your funds towards those kind of funds that are being deployed. You have mutual funds. There are more institutional investors that are, investing for impact. So you can deploy your funds into mutual funds. You can also do that yourself. You can be an angel investor, join a community of angels who are investing for impact. They have several of them now. Lagos Investors, Lagos Angel Network. You have rising tides that are gender focused. You have, even SME NG too, they also create opportunities for blended finance, to be done in such a way that high net worth individuals who have capital and are looking for investment opportunities can deploy those kind of funds. So there are a plethora of opportunities that you can invest. Also, you can invest in other international impact funds. You see them online, but please check before you start investing in them. You can also look at some other countries that are they use ESG to screen their investment. However, I won't just keep the conversation on impact investing. There are plethora of opportunities for you to invest in both locally and globally. Just do your homework, identify the funds, go through the normal due diligence as an individual, check out the returns, that you're looking at, both social returns and also financial returns. And once you're comfortable, you go out and invest. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Etimore. I think that's been so helpful. So like she said, there are angel investor networks. There are networks, platforms like SMENG that can, help direct you. And certain investor networks are even mutual funds that you can, participate in as a retail investor. You don't have to be an institutional investor. You don't have to have the kind of, funding that you would expect institutional investors to have. So again, that's sort of how you can participate on a smaller scale, as long as you've done your own due diligence and you're comfortable with what you believe you're investing in or directions that you're being pushed into, then you can participate. I think my next question, which I guess is for you, Atul, working at the IFC, it says, for the IFC, what is their funding strategy in Nigeria? Is it majorly fund of funds or direct investment in venture deals? Also, for social investments, I don't think the returns might be that impressive compared to other investment alternatives. So what is the incentive for fund managers to invest in social causes?
Okay, no, thank you. Thank you very much for the question. Specifically in Nigeria, of course, we've had a few direct investments over the past few years. We also invested in mostly Pan-African funds, but also Nigeria-focused, venture capital funds and as well as private equity funds. I think we take a 60-40 approach, and 60% of the time we would like to go directly with ticket prices that are large, but at the same time to develop the ecosystem in Nigeria, we'd like to support funds as well, and I think the strategy would continue in this form as things currently go. No, definitely. I think as some of my fellow panelists pointed out, there is evidence of financial returns in addition to the social impact piece of impact investing. So that itself is a big incentive for emerging fund managers to go into this space. At the same time, as the global impact investment pool of capital grows, I think capital will come searching for you and request you or direct you to go into this space. And globally, that's what we are seeing. You see, I think recently I heard the state of Texas was suing certain institutional investors because they're not investing in oil and gas. Right? So I think that's the other side of things where you want to go into this other direction, then capital will seek you, especially because you are impact focused and have developed the standards and structure around it. Yeah, so that's how I would say.
Thank you so much, Atul. I think you answered the question perfectly. That person, wanted some information as to the IFC's investment criteria, and I think you've really touched on that. I think Joe can also touch the second question as to, again, the dichotomy between not believing that there might be as much gain to be made in impact investments as opposed to traditional investments. Because the person asked, I can read the question out again, and the question says, for social investments, I don't think the returns might be as impressive compared to other investment alternatives. So what is the incentive for fund managers to invest in social causes? Joe, I think you can touch on that.
Hi, thank you. So you're right, some sectors don't have as great returns, but we really see that for impact investors where impact is at the core of what their purpose is, then they are not seeking, for example, seeking capital preservation or a few percentage points below market rates. And those types of investors are foundations, family offices, for example, high net worth individuals, DFIs. So I think the point is individual investors need to tailor their strategies according to the sectors that bring the commercial returns that they are seeking. Sub-commercial returns are not for everybody, but there are fantastic returns to be had in some sectors. For example, some impact enterprises that I work with directly can offer 15 to 20% return to an investor. So I think the point is that the investor is, if it's not comfortable with investing in subpar returns, don't do it. Invest in those opportunities that are gainful, and there are plenty.
Thank you so much, Joy. I think that's very beneficial. But again, it's not all doom and gloom. As you mentioned earlier, some reports are actually saying that impact-focused portfolios are outperforming traditional portfolios. And I think that would make sense in the advanced economies, in the advanced markets, where there's this growing focus on sustainability, ESG, social benefits. And so, the average consumers, or when even looking at these portfolio companies or SMEs, when interacting with SMEs, would go for sort of, SMEs that are more aligned with sort of, call them like fair trade arrangements, agreements, social arrangements, and that are more aligned with those social goals and social, internal beliefs that they have. So I would, expect that in some economies, in some markets, socially responsible and target socially responsible companies that might be included in impact portfolios might actually, outdo their more traditional counterparts. But then again, like you said, if you're looking at purely financial gains, then an impact portfolio is not the one for you. Again, because there is that risk of subpar performance. I think our final question, just before we wrap up, because we're a little bit over time, is just I am set to launch a mechanic as a service startup, and one of the key challenges we faced in positioning our startup for impact has been the unstable government policies. I'm assuming this is here in Nigeria or in Africa. What do you advise we do to mitigate this roadblock? Could anyone like to answer that? I think we've touched on policies that regulators and the government can help with, so you can answer that. What do you advise we do to mitigate this roadblock of unstable government policies? I have to run my glasses. I think it's not something that an individual can solve. It's a macroeconomic challenge that every small business, not only in Nigeria, in most emerging markets, would have to face. In terms of even drawing up your business model ab initio, you need to think about policy inconsistency depending on the sector that you're going into. So what are the likely policies that you need to start addressing? So you have to build that into your risk profile, your risk strategy, and what are the mitigants you need to put in place to address those risks when they happen. Yeah. Particularly your investors will ask, want to see your risk profile. And if policy inconsistency might be a huge challenge to your business, you might want to find out what other ways, can I go about it? Who should I dialogue, to address it? And who in government, should I be speaking with? What association or network of, as a group should I belong to that we can work together and tackle? I also believe something that we can do as small businesses is that we need to learn the ropes from others who have been before us. How did you overcome this policy inconsistency? What did you do
how can I position my business to overcome that challenge? If you must be in that particular line, you must find out what has been done before, what you need to do to overcome it, and how do you mitigate this risk so that you do not keep falling into it. Otherwise, your business will not grow.
Thank you so much, Mr. Timur. That's very, very helpful. Again, there's only a limited, there is a limited amount that we can play in, affecting government policies. But again, you can't find manners to circumvent this. And again, who you should, in terms of knowing who you should be interacting with, it's all about networking and growing your connection, who you should be interacting with in order to get advice on, how best to handle these governmental policies, especially if you're, there's no way for you to circumvent it because that's the markets in which you operate. So I guess that just brings us to the end of our session today. It's been incredibly informative, and I hope it's also been the same for you, the audience. I want to thank my panelists today. They've been so encouraging. They've spoken so informatively and so well and so intelligently. And they're obviously taking the time out to be here with us today, both in person and virtually. We're incredibly appreciative of you. Again, my name is Tony Sani. I work within the Venture Capital Division of the Emerging Africa Group. And it's been a pleasure hosting this webinar today. And I hope that we've all learned a little bit more about venture capital with impact and sustainable investments. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you so much.